Welcome to the first GingerGM Method. My name is Grandmaster Simon Williams, better known as the GingerGM, and I'm here to take you through what should be an exciting and very interesting course that will improve your chess. Now, I've done loads of teaching over my years as a chess player. I'm a Grandmaster, been a Grandmaster for about 10 years. I've been teaching probably for about 20 years. And I'm going to cover all those basic problems that a lot of you guys might have. So problems like, do you have enough time? Enough time to look at the things you should be looking at. And we're going to try to make shortcuts but in a good way, a foundation way. So a way that has a good, solid foundation. And throughout this course, I'm basically going to try to give you these little secrets, these secret ideas which will improve your game. Ideas that have helped me become a Grandmaster. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't study the game as much as I should do. I use these shortcuts and they've helped me become a Grandmaster a lot quicker than probably I should have become. And during this course, we're going to have a look at various different ideas. So trying to get rid of your blunders, try to look at your style of chess as well. And the aim really is to not just teach you stuff that other people have done, but really get to the crux of the matter. So I want to get rid of all the drosh. I don't want to teach you stuff which, is not going to be good. We're just going to do the secret sort of important stuff which you might not have heard about before. So rather than like learning stuff that's going to be bad for you, learning stuff that is a waste of time, we're going to go straight to the important stuff. So throughout this course, let's have a quick think about what we're going to do. So we're going to have a look at styles. So I want you guys to play a style that is going to work for you. So a lot of people pick a wrong style in chess. We're going to get a good style for you guys, and we're going to have a look at what kind of style is going to suit you, your individual preferences. And then we're going to basically develop on this and try to build a very good foundation that you can use to improve your chess. And that's my aim. My aim is basically to make you guys a better chess player in the simplest and quickest way that I possibly can. This chapter is called Building a Strong Foundation. And a lot of players I've seen in the past will basically have repertoires, opening repertoires, use tactics that just do not suit them. And what I want to do is give you a good foundation you can build upon. For example, like in the opening, do you guys maybe get in trouble in the opening? Maybe you're not sure exactly what you're doing at certain areas. I want to pick openings that are going to work incredibly well for you personally, openings that suit your style. I also want to talk about how you can improve generally, so how you can learn from your mistakes. This is a very important thing to do. It comes from the Russian school of chess. One of the most important things in life is not to repeat the same mistake 2 times. You can make a mistake once, but we should all learn from our mistakes. And we're going to look at some specific examples of how we can do that in this chapter. And also, one thing I think a lot of players don't do is adapting to their opponent and their opponent's ideas. And this is a key thing. One thing I've noted with a lot of, should we say, students I've taught in the past, they don't improve because they're so transfixed on their own ideas. But we're going to have a look how we can adapt to our opponent's ideas as well. But basically, we're going to build this foundation in this chapter. I'm going to use some of my own examples, and I'm sure this will lead you to bigger and greater things.
Hello and welcome to this course. I should say congratulations or thank you as well for purchasing this course, and I really hope it improves your chess. I haven't ever done anything quite like this before, so it's quite an honor to do this, and I've really put a lot of effort into creating this course to try and prove everyone out there who's watched this, get your value for money and give you some key tips which have helped me become such a strong player in my life. And what's going to happen in this course? So let me just give you a little overview before I dive straight into the action. Well, first of all, the idea of this course is to get you as good as I can in the easiest possible way. So I know a lot of people watching this won't have all the time in the world to improve. So I'm going to give you tidbits, like little bits of advice as we go along to help you improve your game. I'm going to use a lot of examples, so mainly examples that I've noticed from my own play and top level games, which we can learn from. And we're going to see how we can relate this to your own games. So in this first chapter, I think it's very important before we dive into anything else to build a solid foundation. It's a bit like that story from the Bible of the person who built his house on sand. And it might be an attractive idea to go and build a house on the beach. Lovely idea. But if you build a house on sand, it may well crumble, as in the Bible. And we need to get solid foundations for us to move through this course. And one thing I've tried to do is keep it entertaining throughout this whole method I'm putting across to you. But also I want to try to teach you through an entertaining and informative way. So information is going to come at you, hopefully in a way you'll remember, in sharp and typical ways that, I've done throughout my sort of career as a chess player. So this chapter is building your foundations. So what are going to be the key points for you to take away from this chapter? Well, first of all, really, I think one of the most important ways to learn as a person in life and as a chess player is building on our own mistakes from past experiences. This is a famous expression saying it's okay to make a mistake, but if you make that mistake on repeat occasions, you're just being foolish. So we're going to try and have a look at how we can look at our mistakes from our games and maybe how we can locate those mistakes and improve in future so we don't make the same mistakes twice. That's something we're going to be looking at in this building foundations. This comes from the Russian school of chess, and it helps so many players in Russia become great because they looked at their own mistakes and they eliminated these weaknesses from their games. But as well as this, I want you to try and realize what your strengths are, because you should try to eliminate your mistakes and your weaknesses and concentrate on your strengths, because then chess will be more fun and you'll become a stronger player. So that's another thing we're going to look at. And a key thing, I think, which is neglected a lot in chess is patterns. I mean, that might seem very basic, but what I mean by that is I suggest you guys at home pick ideas, openings, middle game plans, end game plans, which have similar patterns, because then you'll learn in a much easier way. You can pick patterns in one opening, you can use in another opening, saving you lots of time. They don't have to be vastly complicated. You've got to try to recognize patterns and get your patterns, get your setups in. I mean, for example, let's dive into what I mean by that. For when I used to play with the white pieces, so let me just flip the board. I got to IM strength by playing the following 10 moves. I used to play c4, and then I used to play knight c3, and I used to play g3. So let's have a look against pretty much everything. So let's say opponent plays the King's Indian. I used to play knight c3, and now after bishop g7, I used to do the same sort of 8 moves as white. g3, and let's say he goes for the King's Indian, bishop g2, castles, and now I'd play d4, d6, knight e2, and it doesn't really matter what my opponent plays, whether he goes e5 or c5. I'd go castles, and then I would go d3, and I'd play these moves, these first 8 moves, without thinking. So by learning one type of setup, I save a lot of work, and I can concentrate more on the middle game rather than the opening, meaning I concentrate on the important things. So then I get to know the plans in this position. I get to know, for example, whether I go f4 here, h3 and f4 is a very common idea. In a lot of lines, I would try to play b4. But I learn about the middle game from picking very simple patterns. So that's another thing we are going to look at here. And also, I want you to remember that chess is a game of 2 halves. So what you need to do in chess is adapt to your opponent's ideas and really think about your opponent's plans. And this is something that is really neglected in chess a lot. I see a lot of people not doing this. You really need to get in the habit of jumping into your opponent's mind. So again, we're going to look at how we can do this. So really, the key things to take away from this chapter are patterns, getting patterns you're familiar with, and we'll go more in depth into this later on in the course. Learning from your mistakes. So you've got to learn from your mistakes, improve them, and realizing where you're strong and trying to get that kind of strength into your play. And also your opponent. So adapting to your opponent, letting your opponent hang himself, letting him make mistakes, and also preempting his ideas. Okay, so let's dive into a game just to demonstrate this. So I'm going to show you a game against another Grandmaster, Mark Headland, which I had. And now there's two things which we're going to look at in this game. First of all, the opening I picked, I played to my strengths. I'm an attacking, aggressive player. It might not be sound, but I play a very tactical opening because I'm also adapting to my opponent. My opponent, Mark, is very good if he gets his kind of setup in. So knowing your opponent can help. In this case, I did. You're not always going to know what your opponent's like, so don't worry about that. We will look at cases when you don't know your opponent, how you should play when you have less information. But here, let's just see how I got this in. These ideas we've been sort of just looking at, and also tactical ideas, patterns, how I know patterns, and I got this all to work in this game. So my opponent always plays d4. Now, I normally play the Dutch defense with e6 and f5, but my opponent would be well prepared for that, and he'd get a nice quiet position. So I decided to go for something a lot more tactical. He's also an older, no offense to him, but he's an older generation player, so he might not be used to me coming straight at him. You can't do this against everyone, but against certain players, we need to adapt. So I played knight to f6 in this position, and after knight to f6, I knew what my opponent would do because he picks the same pattern every game. He played with knight f3 and with c4. I played into the queen's gambit with e6, and now my opponent always plays bishop g5. Now, to play to my strength, I want to create complications because I know that that's where I'm strongest, in complications. So if I play something like bishop e7, or let's say c6 here, or knight d7, we get a more prolonged game. But now by capturing on c4, we enter into complications. I've grabbed the pawn, I'm trying to tempt him, my opponent, into something that he's going to have to be awake in. He can't sleep, he can't play an autopilot in the following lines. So now we go into a very complex variation called the Botvinnik semi-Slav. Don't worry too much about theory. I don't think that's something that's really going to help you learning theory. That's not what I'm concentrating on this course. There's other ways you can do that. I'm concentrating on general ideas and how we can use them in our own games. So without learning tons of theory. Quick, easy information. Now, this opening here with b5, you can see it's already incredibly complex. I've won a pawn, but my opponent has gained a very strong center, and it's going to be a very tactical game. That's what I want. I've drawn him into my kind of game. Now, he went e5. The only way I can save my piece on f6 is by playing h6, kicking that bishop away, and now the main line, g5. Very complex opening. And here, knight takes g5 is the main idea. He wants to keep the pin on my knight on f6. So after knight takes g5, I now uncaught a really rare move. Now the main move is to take back the knight on g5, but here I played knight to d5. Now this is an old sacrificial line which is not entirely sound, but it has its point on certain occasions. I played this because I was pretty confident my opponent would not know how to answer this. It's not something I'd be able to play on numerous occasions, but also it gives me the initiative. That's what I want. And it basically just really gets my opponent out of his comfort zone. I also know the patterns which I'm supposed to do after this. This is very key. One way you guys should do this, once you've picked an opening you like, look at the top players who play that opening. More on that later on. So after knight d5, the main move here, he's got to now do something really, really sharp. And he takes on f7. And here I sacrifice the exchange. Queen takes h4, knight takes h8. So, you know, I have given up an exchange. He's got a rook for my bishop, for the bishop I've captured. And he's also got an extra pawn, I believe, here. So his points up. But now my play comes very quickly, and I know the patterns which I should be playing here. So everything flows. I play bishop b4, developing a piece, pinning the knight on c3 here. My opponent now played queen d2, and I think this is already a slight error, because the queen on d1 it's better to keep it there, because then he has ideas of bishop e2 and bishop h5 check, for example. So this is already a slight error, showing he might not be well accustomed to what happens. And now the next plan, c5. Again, I'm playing as actively as possible, and I knew this plan in advance from looking at the games of top players. And the whole point of this move is I keep attacking, I pressurize d4, and I try to break up this pawn formation my opponent has on d4 and e5. When I break that up, my other pieces can fly in, my knight and my bishop. So I knew what I was going to do next. He did take on c5. And here, I just get all my pieces into the game. Again, before I go for checkmate, I've got to build a foundation. I've got to stick to principles. I've got to develop all my pieces. And at the moment, these 3 pieces over here are asleep. So let's get them out of bed and in the game. Knight to d7. This knight is now trying to dive into the action. My opponent decides to play very simple moves, and he plays bishop e2, aiming to get his king castled. So what do I do here? Well, of course, I take a central pawn. And now both of my knights are very active. My opponent does castle. This is a bad decision, because his king is now really open to my attack. What do? I get my last piece into the game, bishop to b7. And this is a fantastic attacking position. Already, white is in some difficulties here. With all my pieces getting ready, all I need to do is get one more move, castle, get my rook into the game, and my whole plan has worked. Why? Because I've tricked him in the opening. I've gone for an opening that suits me, and I know where my pieces should go in the middle game. Later, we'll look at this in more depth. Now, for example, let's just have a look at some lines where my opponent could have gone wrong here. In the end, he played f4 because he suddenly realizes some danger, but it's too late. Because what am my plan? Well, I want to throw all my pieces at his king. I want to go knight to f4 next, and that will really create pressure, mainly against g2. So my opponent tried to stop that. Let's have a look what could happen if he didn't. I'm going to throw a little question at you as well. Let's say he goes rook d1. What should we do here? Well, knight to f4 is natural. Let's say he plays a move like a3. Well, it's black to play and win now, and there's a beautiful line here which black can do. And the winning move here, pause the video if you need to. It's beautiful. Queen to h3. Oh yeah, that's the kind of move I would get so excited about playing. I would be like, come on, get in there. And the whole point of this is we're threatening checkmate, and if he takes the queen, knight takes h3, checkmate. We'll have a look at how to improve our tactics later on, but I just wanted to share this beautiful line with you. Like, again, this is just a foundation thing. I just want to build the foundations for the rest of the course by using little tips. So let's have a look how the game ended. f4 was played, and now I just need to create threats. This is very important for when you're attacking. So how do I create a threat? Well, first of all, my bishop has done a good job here. We might as well move it into a better square, lining up against his king. And my bishops are really the hero of this position. King to h1, and now create threats. Create threats. If you're going to play in such a manner, you have to be a very energetic player. You can't back down. You have to keep looking at going forwards. And this occurs in certain situations. So look at the forwards moves. My knight dives into e3. And this opens up my bishop with ideas of bishop takes g2. Now, my opponent played bishop to f3 here, trying to stop that. Very quickly, if he decided to take on e5, this would be hopeless because I had the tactics. Bishop takes g2 check, king g1, and now all I need to do is open up this bishop by playing a move like knight takes f1 check. And it's either going to be checkmate or I'm going to win the queen. The position is hopeless. Now, you might be amazed at this point, after bishop f3, that this game had actually occurred before in 1996, but it was a really obscure game, but I knew about this. So all I've been doing is following a patterns that I liked and trying to get it into the game at the right time. And here, well, the win's quite easy. I first just keep threatening checkmate. How do I do that? Knight to g4, threatening checkmate on h2. My opponent now can either move his h-pawn or his g-pawn to stop this. If he moves his h-pawn, well, can you see how we can checkmate here? Well, I'm not going to, dwell too long. Pause if you want to, but it's a little nice theme. Remember, create threats when you're attacking. Keep looking at ways to create threats. White hasn't got any checks that are any good. How do we create a threat? Let's try to get our queen in. Queen to g3. And our queen is trying to wriggle into h2 with checkmate. And at some point, he's going to have to take our knight. Let's say pawn takes g4. And this is a very common tactical theme. Again, it's understanding patterns from tactics, remembering those patterns, and then using them in games. Queen to h4. The queen comes back because the h file is open. Checkmate. The game ended with g3, but now I just want to use my two bishops here. It is quite tactical here. Don't worry too much about the tactics. This is an introduction. We'll look at how you can improve your tactics later on. But knight takes f3 was the winning move. And this is a beautiful way to win. The point is, if he takes my queen, knight takes d2 would unleash my bishops. And hopefully you can see here, it's going to be checkmate very soon. And Mark tried, well, he resigned here actually. If he tries queen g2, then I'll leave it to you guys to work out where the checkmate is. So that's just a little introduction game to see how I knew my strengths, I knew my opponent's weaknesses, I knew patterns, I know how to work to my strengths there. Now, in the next couple of examples, I want to give you a couple of examples of opening setups, opening patterns that can be used not just in one opening, but in many openings. And if you do this, it will save you a lot of time, because you can just keep playing the same patterns, as I gave you an example at the start with the English. You can save time because you can use them in many different openings, making your workload a lot less, but keeping the effectiveness of your concepts to a real high level. So let's have a look at that now, and I'll just bring up the game, and we'll be back with it in a second. Right, so in this game, I'm actually not going to show you one of my own games, but I'm going to show you a game of a good friend of mine, Richard Pert, who's an international master. And we're going to look at this from the black side. And he was rated 24-20 in this game. His opponent was a strong FM, Peter Sauray, with white. And in this game, Richard uses a couple of things that I'm going to try to get across to you to improve your own game. So what does he do? Well, first of all, he plays an opening where he knows the plans very, very well. He knows exactly where all the pieces should go to and exactly how to proceed going into the middle game. And even if he gets to an ending, this is one thing you need to do. Don't just read an opening book and look at lines. Think of the ideas. Keep asking yourself, why? Why did I move that piece there? Where does it want to go later? What plan am I trying to do later on? When your opponent moves a piece, ask yourself the same. What's my opponent trying to do? Should I stop it, or do I not have to worry about it? So really, it's asking why, and understanding patterns. Now, Richard actually played this opening because of me. It's an opening that I'm a world expert in, the Dutch defense. I've played all my life. I've beaten some top players in this. I beat Boris Gelfand just after his world championship match. I think I was the first person to beat him with black. This is after he fought for the world championships against Anand. I beat him with the Dutch because I knew the ideas in the middle game so well. So again, patterns. Pick patterns that you know that you can use time and time again. It keeps it effective with less work. So here, basically, the game started knight to f3, and the Dutch now goes with f5. And again, let's not talk about the opening so much, but about the patterns and the ideas. g3, knight to f6, and here Richard now played for a setup which I suggested to him, and that is one with d6 and e5. Because when you get two pawns in the center like this, it gives you a great foundation to start an attack. And there's a couple of stages to this. Basically, stage one is to get these two pawns to f5 and e5, move the bishop to e7 and get castled. So let's do this in stages. Stage one is this simple development of the king side, getting your king castled, controlling the center. So how do we play e5 as quickly as possible? We go d6. Now, of course, white can play d4 and we'd have to change plans there. We're not always going to get our patterns in, but we will be able to. And then we've got to adapt and we've got to change to another pattern we should know very well. So white didn't do that. He castled. So stage one, e5, White played d3. It doesn't really matter what white plays if he's not going to fight for control of center. Bishop e7, c4, castles. Stage 1. Richard has played stage 1. He's got his king safe, and he has a very nice central structure. He can use these pawns to push forwards. White now continued developing. And here, well, Richard didn't need to play his next move, but we'll come to this later on, thinking about your opponent. And this is something we've already mentioned. We should be thinking all the time about our opponent's plans and what they're trying to do. Now, generally in chess, you play on the area of the board where you have more space. So in this position, black has more space over here because you have your 2 pawns there, meaning you have space on the king side and the center. So black should be concentrating that area of the board. Where does white have more space? Where is he trying to play? Well, white has more space, really, because of the move c4 on the queen side. And he will be trying to play b4 on that area of the board. So what did Richard do to stop this? He played a5. So cleverly thinking about his opponent's ideas and trying to stop it. He didn't need to do this, but I like it. Rook to b1 was now played. And here, well, because you played f5, Richard just played a safety first move. Because he thought later on, again, he's thinking about his opponent's ideas, he might be in some danger on this diagonal. So he just tucked his king to h8. No rush at the moment. But here we come to the real second stage of this whole plan. And again, this is a plan that not many people know of, but if you know about the patterns, you understand the ideas out of the opening, and you ask yourself why, what should I be doing, it can win you so many games. So what is black's next stage? Well, let's start an attack on the area of the board we're strongest. Where's that? On the king side. How do we do that? Well, we can bring in the queen to the attack. Where does that queen want to go? Well, let's get it near our opponent's king. Let's move it to e8, h5. So that's the little first thing we do. So when we got our queen near our opponent's king, what can we do next? Well, we need to bring in more firepower. And this bishop on c8, which hasn't moved, is actually a fantastic piece. This bishop can be brought over to h3. Why? Because when you're attacking, you need to swap off your opponent's defenders. The bishop on g2 is a key defender. So how do we get the bishop to h3? Well, we're going to have to play f4, bishop h3, getting rid of a defender of our opponents. Then what are we trying to do? We need to locate a potential weakness in our opponent's defensive structure. And a potential weakness is the h2 square. How do we increase the pressure? Because remember, we've got our queen over here attacking that square. How can we increase the pressure on that square? Well, we can bring our knight to g4. And everything then is lined up. So this is stage 2. And again, knowing the patterns, knowing the ideas, things flow really easily. And this is against a very good opponent. So let's see stage 2 in action. Queen to e8. White continues with b4. But okay, he's not doing anything too scary there, so we can continue with our plan. Queen h5. White goes queen b3. And now note how useful it is to have the king here. That is called prophylactic thinking. Thinking ahead about our opponent's ideas and just stopping them. And again, this will improve with your understanding of the game and looking at examples of top players. So what's the next stage? Can you remember? This is still stage 2. We need to get the bishop in, get rid of a defender of our opponent's pieces, f4. Now, of course, this is a little bit risky because it looks like a pawn gambit. It is a pawn gambit. But if white takes on f4, we don't worry. We're not worried because that opens up his king. And giving up a pawn to open our opponent's king up is absolutely fine. And we just continue here with bishop to h3. And he doesn't have the defense of g3 there. So even here, we just continue with our plan. But instead, white now played knight to d5. Okay, so now we've got to think. Because we can't just continue with our plan because we've got to look at what our opponent's doing and we've got to work around that. So chess is all about continuing our own plans, our own patterns, and stopping our opponent's plans. So here, a very good idea. Richard just took that knight off, but we've got to think, what could there be an issue now because the pawn structure changes? Every time the pawn structure changes, we need to reassess the position. Well, one issue here could be the open c file, and we have a new weakness on c7. So we've got to make sure we can defend that. But we can actually defend that with a piece we're not using in our plans, and that is the bishop. The bishop can come to d8. So we don't have to worry too much, but we need to make sure we know how to deal with this. Now, plan 2 is not going to be quite as easy now because we don't have a knight to bring into g4. But knowing the patterns, knowing that we need to get a knight to this square, we can think about our other knight. So how can that knight get there? Well, knowing the patterns is a very easy route. It can come this way. It takes 3 moves. So let's have a look. Richard decided to take on b4, and now knight d7. So we can see he's still going for this plan. Very, very simple. White played bishop d2, and that's a move where it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't have any purpose, so we don't need to worry. Let's continue our plan. Knight to f6. Rook to a1 was played, and now we don't want to allow our opponent to bring his rook into a8, so what's the only sort of way we can stop that here? By simply playing rook to b8. Okay, our rook's not so good, but he can't get his pieces into our position, so we don't need to worry. And now white played rook to c1, and remember what we said? We had to make sure we had this covered. Well, in actual fact, Richard decided not to play bishop d8 straight away. He could just continue with his plan. And again, remember, chess is a battle about continuing with our plan and stopping our opponent's plans. But if we're not worried about rook c7, let's continue with our plan. Bishop to h3. Remember, this is the idea, trying to get rid of these guys, weaken our opponent's king. We're only 1 move away from the end of stage 2. And now white played bishop to e1, trying to defend a bit. We should have a think. What happens if rook takes c7? Well, now another pattern, which I think I first used this pattern when I was about 12, because I saw Macau Tao do it. And again, it's remembering little maneuvers. Once you remember them once you have a bit of experience doing them, you'll just improve on these areas of your game. And what is the pattern? Well, bishop to d8 now, because where's that bishop want to go? That bishop, the rook has to move. We're not worried about losing a pawn, because after bishop b6, another piece enters into this incredibly strong attack. It's only a pawn. It's like a dark cloud is gathering around the white king, and the hammer of doom is about to come descending down on that poor little guy on g1. So anyway, white was scared of this. He played bishop to e1, and look, knight g4, stage 2 done. And this is move 18. And now all that black has to do is know what's the next plan. Well, the next plan, which again I discussed with Richard beforehand, is we have this pressure on h2. It's quite logical. What is the only piece defending h2? It's the knight on f3. So a typical tactical exchange using a pattern is, in this position, to often take on g3, take on g2, and then get rid of that knight. Rook takes f3. This is one pattern. Let's have a look. b5 was played. Okay, so Richard took on g3, opening up his rook. And now after pawn takes h3, he could have certainly considered here trying to get his queen into h2. So he could have considered bishop takes bishop, and now rook takes f3. And the whole point of this is to try to get the queen to h2. So he should have been calculating this, but he probably calculated, you need calculation, this wasn't good enough, because after pawn takes f3, we get a check, but the white king can scuttle away. But it's just a little bit of calculation. So okay, so he realizes here he can't do this. So now he uses another pattern, and this is stage 3 of the whole plan. And stage 3 is, well, he's got an ideal setup with these pieces over here. How can he increase the pressure against his opponent? And you can only increase the pressure, you should only increase the pressure when you're not under too much. Well, you're not really. You've defended against most threats. Okay, white can take on c7, but that's very risky, because then another piece of ours gets to a great square. So how can you increase the pressure here? And this is by a technique called the Rook Swing. There's a half open line on the h-file, and now we use a Rook Swing. Another pattern, Rook f6. And now the rook is coming over to h6 with double power. Queen and rook there. The end is near. Queen a4 was tried. Richard swapped off that defender of the white king. He played rook to h6, threatening checkmate on h1. White's position is hopeless. knight to g1, trying to stop that, but it's checkmate in 2 moves. Queen to h1 check, king f1, and now knight to h2 checkmate. So really, that demonstrates to you, hopefully, how by understanding patterns from the opening, what you should be doing, why did I move my pieces there, what am I trying to achieve, also stopping your opponent's play, their plans, how we can get a lot more effectiveness. Now you may be thinking, Simon, this is only relevant if you play the Dutch. Well, what I'm trying to show you is whatever opening you picked, and I'm not going to go into specific openings because I don't think that's the best way for you to learn. You need to do a bit of work yourself, obviously. Whatever opening you learn, you've got to know the patterns of your pawns and pieces. And then you may even be able to transfer that into other openings. For example, if you play the Dutch, what openings fit well with a Dutch to save yourself a lot of time? Well, an opening that fits very well with a Dutch is also an opening you can play with white. So let's have a look now at another game in a similar manner that copies the same patterns from this, and therefore will save the player, if you play the Dutch and this next opening, a lot of time, because you can play it in both as both white and black. So let's move over there now. So you may be intrigued to know what I'm thinking about here and what I was diving into. Well, we're going to use a game now of 2 incredibly strong players. Luke Machene from England, who's been billed as the strongest ever chess amateur because he has a proper job. He's been nearly 2,700, maybe over 2,700. And his opponent is Ivan Cheparinov, who's 2667, a second of Topalov, incredibly strong. Now, what does Luke do here? Well, Luke understands that pattern we just saw on the last game. So how could he try using it with white? Well, let's have a look. He goes e4. He's always played e4. One of the main responses to this is c5. And now Luke plays a move which is incredibly, incredibly rare. You do not need to follow the openings of top players. You don't need to copy the top guys. In actual fact, I think this is a bad idea. You need to find your own systems that work for you. Why should you copy Magnus? Because only Magnus can play like Magnus. I wouldn't be able to play his intricate maneuvers. It wouldn't work for me, even though I'm a grandmaster. I need to pick patterns that work for me. And I've done that by understanding what kind of player I am. And we're going to look at this for you guys. You need to understand what patterns work for you. And we'll talk about this in the next 2 chapters. But what Luke understands is he wants a simple pattern against a player who's very well prepared. He wants to know exactly how to put his pieces into action. And here he plays d3. A very, very rare move. Why has he done this? Well, remember the last game and it will become clear. Black develops with knight to c6, and what does Luke do? He plays f4. And he's trying to get the same structure we saw Richard Pert use, but as white against the Sicilian. And imagine if he plays the Dutch and this. This is what I do quite often. I don't need to learn loads of things. I know the patterns in the middle game from black and white. I've saved myself loads of time. This is key to improving. So now black goes g6 and Luke does plan number 1. Remember that from the last game? It's simply to get the king castled and develop these guys here. Knight to f3, bishop to e2, and he castles. Plan 1. And remember, he's playing a super strong player. Cheparinov goes knight to f6. What was plan 2 in the last game? Can you remember what Richard played? What was his plan? It was to do, remember, you want to start an attack on the area of the board you're strongest. You're strongest here in the center and on the king side because of these 2 pawns. So what do we do? Can you remember the plan? Well, the plan was get the queen to h4, play f5, bishop to h6, knight to g5. And this is exactly what Luke did. Queen e1. Ivan Cheparinov just castled. So, queen h4. Ivan tried to now do something on the queen side with c4. He needs to do something because there's that storm cloud gathering around the black king. And remember what Richard did. Now that this diagonal is a little bit exposed, we just step out the way. And this is very clever. This is what a lot of lower rated players don't do. Even when you're attacking, you can't just go bang, bang, bang. You need to step back and guard. Your opponent's going to throw a punch. You need to block that punch. You need to think about what he's doing. King to h1, just getting out the way of a potential punch. Pawn takes d3, pawn takes d3, and now bishop g4. So this is quite a clever idea. Black wants to get rid of this knight because that knight could be very dangerous. Luke just develops knight c3, bishop takes f3, and now bishop takes f3. He could have maybe considered moving the rook around, but so far he hasn't done anything special at all. Black now does move his queen to b6, and I have a question for you here. So we've done stage 1. You know, it doesn't look too dangerous for black. Now we need to think of another plan, another pattern, and we looked at this plan in the last game. Remember the plan I remembered from Macau Tao's game? Remember what we did, Macau Tao's game? I got this from Macau Tao, and this is remembering the ideas. It's to do with this piece. Is this piece good here? Not really, because it's looking at this pawn. Even if we move that pawn, it's not doing anything particularly good, because it's attacking the wrong area of the board. We want to attack on the king side because that's where we got the initiative. So how can we move our pieces to the best possible squares to attack the king side? So another tip here, when you're attacking, if you're not under threat, always look at your pieces and think of their potential. Think of what squares you should get them to. Bishop to d1, a brilliant maneuver. This bishop is coming to b3. Can you remember this plan? Where it increases the power against the king. We're lining it up. Whoa, headphones going crazy there. We're lining it up against the opponent's king. Black played queen a6, so we need to look at our opponent's idea. He's threatening d3. How can we defend that threat and create more pressure? Rook to f3. Remember that? That was stage 3, the rook swinger. It's all exactly the same as the last game, but with a different colour. The rook is coming around to increase the pressure. Black now tried to put his rook on an open file, but the rook came in. Rook to h3. And now all white needs to do is try to get rid of this knight when he's going to have a very strong attack here. So black has to contend with ideas of knight d5, getting rid of that defender. That's one key idea. He panics a little bit. He goes h5, trying to stop this one coming through. And here, another key move that we saw in the last game, f5. A key idea. This is attacking g6, and more importantly, our bishop can fly in. Knight to e5, and now it's time to move the bishop here because it can increase the pressure. Bishop to g5. Everything's like clockwork. They're just flying in. And with our bishop now coming to b3, everything is ready to kill. Ivan tried to run away, king to f8, but now just simply pawn takes pawn. It's time to open up the king, and look at this open diagonal. The bishop cuts across that king. Really, that king is in so much trouble. Okay, we give up a pawn, but after knight takes d3, Luke just played rook to f3, and this is only move 20. He's even a pawn down here, but Ivan had had enough and he resigned. Now you may be thinking, why did he resign? But these guys are exceptionally strong players, and they realise when something's gone wrong that it's time to throw in the towel. And the problem here is there's a pretty much unstoppable threat of capturing everything on f6. This is pretty much, nothing black can do. White's going to go bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, queen takes f6. For example, let's say rook to c5, just to demonstrate this. Bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, and queen takes here. And this position is absolutely horrible for black. I mean, we could look at this a lot. I'll let you guys pause it and work it out yourself if you want to. All we need to know is that at this level, these guys are well capable of knowing when they're won and lost. Lower down, this should be played on. I mean, white can pick up a rook here and be a piece up minimum, but there's probably even something stronger here. But that's not the point. The point is, Luke used a very rare opening. So not an opening he picked from top level. I believe that's a mistake. You've got to find your own pet lines. Another key bit of advice. Find lines you're comfortable with, not other people. Pick openings where you know the patterns, not openings where other people know the patterns. You need to know the patterns. Pick openings where you know the ideas in the middle game. Pick openings where the patterns you might be able to use in various openings, saving you time. And practice them, get to know them, adapt your opponents. Okay, well, I think we've talked about patterns enough, and I think this is a key thing. I'm trying to build this story over the course of this, where I'm going to link in everything, and we're going to build up bit by bit and get it into your own games. This is just building the foundations. So what else is important? Well, other things that are important are knowing your own weaknesses and your own strengths. And I think the best way to demonstrate this is by showing you two of my own games and showing you one where I lost because I did something wrong, and then I improved on that and I won in another game. Even though the dates are a different way around, one shows my weaknesses and the other one shows my strengths. And I really need to eliminate the weaknesses, as we all do from our games, but we need to locate them first, eliminate them, and then concentrate on our strengths. So let's move over to that now. Well, first of all, I want to have a look at a game where I lost against a much lower rated player, someone rated more than 200 points lower than me. And really what I did here, I killed myself. It wasn't, no offense to my opponent, but anything particular that he did, I basically showed one of my biggest weaknesses. And if you lose to someone lower rated than you, you've got to work out why you did that and what you did wrong. I mean, generally, as a general rule, against a lower rated player, you shouldn't need to do too much. You should be better than them as a player, hence the rating. So you can often let them kill themselves. This is a little secret, actually, that top players do. They don't do much often when they're playing lower rated players. They let their opponent do the hanging themselves, put the noose around their own neck and kill themselves. But this is quite interesting. I mean, I was white. I'm going to go through the opening very quickly because it's not so relevant. We'll have a look at some key points during it. So it started off with a Queen's Indian, and this Bishop F4 move is something I've played on a regular basis. It's an aggressive move, and this is a mainline position. But now my opponent plays his first error. He didn't obviously understand the right plans in the middle game. And again, we've talked about this. When you play an opening setup, it's okay playing the first moves, but when you get to a position like this, you need to know what your plan is. And here, black should be aiming to play c5 generally, because if he sits there, as my opponent did with c6, he gets a very passive position. I've got a bit more space and compare pieces. His bishop here is now, in England, we say a lemon, which means a bad piece. It's stuck in its cage. The cage is this pawn, this pyramid here. It's stuck behind that. It's in jail. It can't get out. This bishop needs to be on the other side of that chain to be a good piece. I mean, look at my bishop, the kind of corresponding really the bishop. This bishop is outside its prison. So it has a lot more effect on the game. So c6 is too passive. So what I was thinking here is my opponent has played a passive move. I need to now punish him for that. So I need to play aggressively. So I went Queen c2, b6, and here I wanted to punish him with a well-known pattern that I've used in numerous games. So I'm using a couple of things. I'm looking at my opponent's play. He's playing passive. I'm playing aggressive. I play h4. Harry the h-pawn. Why am I playing this? Because I've got a well-known pattern I'm going to use. And we'll see the pattern in a second. Knight bd7. Of course, I'm going to castle queenside. I'm trying to punish him, so I'm playing the most aggressive line. Bishop b7, and now the point of h4, knight g5. And again, if we're going to do this in stages, if your opponent plays very passive in this variation, I know that the pattern, stage 1, of putting my queen here, my knight here, my pawn here, is very, very dangerous. Now, why do I need a pawn on h4 to make this more dangerous? Well, the point is, if he ever plays h6 here, I'm now no longer concerned about him taking my knight. For example, let's say I go bishop e2. If he takes my knight, I take with my g-pawn and I open up the Harry file, the h file. And with my queen dangerously threatening to come in, this is a very big attack. So the h-pawn supports my knight on this square. So all going okay so far. Rook e8. And now I'm thinking, well, the only piece that's defending that square is his knight. Let's try to exchange that off. And I open things up. e4. I want to exchange his defensive piece off for my piece, which is not doing so much, like in the previous games. My opponent takes on e4, and now I bring in my least active piece. He captures. I'm threatening a massive check here. he goes passive. Now, there's not an immediate breakthrough here, so I need to develop my last pieces. Bishop d3. He now goes queen c8. So when your opponent plays a move, always think what their idea is. Every move you should be thinking this, especially if they play a weird little move like this. What's his idea? Well, his idea clearly is to play c5 when his bishop will open up. So now I had a long think and I found a very good plan. Queen f3. My queen is rerouting to get nearer to his king. So when he plays c5, which I expected, my queen dives into h5. Threatening queen takes f7. g6 was played, and my queen wriggles its way into h6. And look at how all my pieces are so dangerously placed around his king. It's looking very good. My opponent now played bishop f6 with the idea of going bishop g7. And now we have a key moment in my downfall. Now, my next idea is okay. But one of my weaknesses is I generally go for beauty over correctness. And this is something, if I want to become a stronger player, I've just got to not take so many risks, and simple is good. You don't need to play extravagant moves unless there's a big reason to do so. Simple chess generally works better than anything extravagant. So here I played h5 with quite a ridiculous idea in mind, which is still okay, but it goes down the wrong path. My weakness is I go too much into things when the simple option I should pick rather than the extravagant, flashy one. I shouldn't go flashy. If there's a simple way of winning, pick the simple way. Now, the simple move here is, what's the only piece that's going to cause me trouble? This bishop. It wants to come here. So, logically thinking, if I can exchange off this bishop, that's going to improve my position and I can build up slowly without getting any trouble. How can I exchange that bishop? Simply by playing bishop to e5. Like in the last patterns we saw, remember when we swapped off our opponent's fianchetto bishop? It's similar here. And this would have led me to a very, very strong attack. For example, he has to really take, and I'm going to get h5 in. There's going to be a massive disaster happening here because all of my pieces and Harry the h-pawn are attacking. My opponent has no active play. He hasn't done anything active, so I don't need to fear any of his play. Even if he takes on g2, I'm not worried about that. It's only a pawn. Checkmate's coming. That's what I should have done. Instead, I went h5 because after bishop g7, I saw a fantastic idea. My fantastic idea was pawn takes g6, leaving my queen on pre. And the point is, if my opponent takes my queen, maybe you want to pause the video in a second, I have a forced checkmate now. And pause it now to see if you can work out what that is. It's quite beautiful. Well, the forced checkmate is pawn takes g7 check. And if king g7, bishop e5 is checkmate. A bit like my game, the first game I showed you against Mark Hedman, the power of the bishops. And if he goes king to h8, I go bishop e5 check, only one way to defend. And now I have a winning tactical resource here. And again, if you haven't worked it out yet, I suggest you pause the video now and try to work out the killer blow, or the blows that are going to continue. The killer blow is rook takes h7 check, giving up another piece, trying to create a piece of art. And if knight takes h7, rook to h1. And this is quite beautiful. There's no good way of stopping rook takes h7 checkmate. No good way. And I'm going to win the game in a beautiful manner, and it's going to be a piece of art. So that's all well and good. But I'm complicating things. I'm trying to really go for artistic ways when simple would get me the result done better. It's a weakness. I know what my weakness is, so I've got to stop doing this in future. And I've got to realise during games I'm doing this. You guys at home need to look at your games, locate your weaknesses. So when you lose a game, it's much more important looking at your losses than your wins. You might not want to do this, but you've got to look at your losses, not with a computer. A computer might help you with blunder checks, but try to work out where things went wrong and what your mind was thinking at that moment. What were you thinking? Because you're doing something wrong. And you've got to improve that in future. Where did you go wrong? What was your mind thinking? How can you improve that in future? And work it out like I have here. Now, going back to the game, I'll show you how it finished. My opponent played f takes g6, and here, again, another case of doing the wrong move. If I'd simply played my queen, its attack to h2, I'm still probably winning here. All my pieces are lined up against my king. Look at the positioning of my pieces. I'm threatening to take on h7. It should be game over. That's what I needed to do. But instead, I got a rush of blood to the head. I rushed this. When you're playing a risky move, you need to calculate twice as much. I didn't do this, and I dived in with what I thought was a brilliant idea, bishop takes g6. But what I had missed here, very embarrassing, my opponent took the queen. I tried to do the same thing that I just showed, bishop to f7 check, king h8, bishop e5 check, bishop here. I went rook takes h7, and then I went rook h1, thinking that I'd won. I played this really quickly without too much thought, classical mistake, but now my opponent had a very embarrassing defense. Embarrassing for me. He's only 2200. I was totally ashamed of how I lost this game, but I don't want to ever do this again. And can you see his defense? Now that I don't have a bishop on d3, he can go bishop e4, and I have to resign. Because he's defending against checkmate, and if I go knight takes e4, he now has time to defend the threat. Something like bishop takes e5 and king to g7. I simply don't have enough pieces left. So in that game, the lesson is, I went for art over precise, simple ideas. Simple is good. But that's me personally. What do you need to do? You need to look at your losses from games. If you haven't played a competitive game, you can play online. But what I'd say is do not play blitz if you really want to get better. Play a longer time limit. Play a half an hour game at least. And really think about your moves. Don't, go really treat it seriously. If you lose the game, even if you win, try to work out where things went wrong. You might want to use a computer if you're not sure where you went wrong, but the computer is not going to tell you why you went wrong or where you went wrong. It will give you an indication. If the computer suddenly changes its assessment at some point during the game, go to that with a board, without the computer, look at the board and think, what was I thinking? You should be able to remember roughly what you're thinking. Why did that lose me the game? How can I stop doing that in future? This is what you need to do time and time again to become a better player. But now let's see how, on another occasion, I realized that this way of me thinking was a bad way and how I improved on that. And I therefore created a much better game. And this is going to be the next one, the last game of this chapter. Well, in this game, I was playing a very strong player, Pavel Ilyanov, who's now one of the world's elite. At the time, I was rated 2.520 and my opponent 2.712, FIDE. So he's much higher rated than me. But what I did here, I realized that simple is good. And if I get a good position, not to go crazy. If you get a good position, it's often better to wait until your opponent hangs himself. He's going to be more frustrated than you are. So how did I do that? Well, let's go through the opening quite quickly. I'm not going to comment on the opening moves except for key moments. Now, the first key moment in this theoretical position is here. My opponent played bishop to e6. Now, this is a move I hadn't seen in any of the theory I studied, but to me it looked quite strange. What is the bishop doing there? Nothing. It's a bad square for the bishop. It's hitting its own pawn. So I assumed that this move my opponent had played was a mistake. And yes, it is a mistake. So when your opponent plays a mistake or something you're not expecting, ask yourself these questions. Why is this not played often? What is the minus points of this move? Well, normally black plays the knight to d7 here. So what I was thinking is, well, he's going to want to play knight d7, so how can I make that a little bit more tricky for him? How can I, try to take advantage of this? And I suddenly saw, well, if I go knight to e5, now if he goes knight d7, I can consider taking this knight off, and this pin is going to be very dangerous. Maybe with queen b3 now, increasing the pressure. So I'm already looking at my opponent's slightly odd move and playing something to try to take advantage of that. So now we played a lot of moves and I gained an edge. I just played simple development. Now, what is the key thing here? Whenever whenever you're offered an exchange of pieces, minor pieces, you should always ask yourself, which piece is strongest? Obviously, is my bishop stronger than the knight? Well, the reason I won this game is because of this bishop here. And this pin on his knight was an internal pin. Exchanging off on f6 would be a big error because I get rid of that pin and I relieve the pressure. Keep as much pressure as you can against your opponent. Bishop h4. My opponent now went knight to c6. I simply castled. He took on d4. And now I have to take his knight, and I took back on d4. And already I have a nice position. My pawn structure is better because his c6 pawn is a weakness. I can go rook c1 and knight to a4 when my rook is attacking that pawn and my knight has this square to jump into. This is a typical idea. So my opponent tried to get rid of that weakness by playing c5. And now I went a3, forcing him to give up the bishop pair. And look how strong this pin is on his knight now. The only way he can break that is by playing g5. But if he moves a pawn in front of his king, he really weakens his king. So in this position, I certainly have an advantage. Now, a younger version of me might have got excited here and started to play reckless, maybe by throwing my f-pawn up. But I realized that my opponent is in an uncomfortable situation, and one key thing here that helped me was understanding what my opponent's trying to do. Does he have a good plan? So always ask yourself, does your opponent have a good plan? Try to work out what that plan is. I fought for a long time and I realized that he can't really do anything. The only pawn break he can play is g5. I want him to play that because that will weaken his king. So I can wait forever for him to play that. He can't move his knight. He can't move his queen, really, because I'm going to double his pawns. His bishop on e6 is useless because it's hitting its own pawns. His rook on b8 has potential to come in, but it's not really doing anything. So I realized here I don't have to rush. I can just try to improve little by little and maybe wait until he hangs himself. So I just played useful moves. So you've got to adapt to every situation. Rook e1, rook on an open line, improves. He can't do anything. He's trying to maneuver. Now, rook e5. This improves my position because my rook gets a little bit more active. Maybe I can come this way. Maybe it just seems a little bit more active here. It's never going to be attacked. Rook e8. And now something quite clever I did. I thought, well, let's prove to him who's boss. Bishop a4. Because if he tries to defend with bishop d7, well, I have a number of ideas here, but he's really going to be in problems because of this pin. And there's some little, tactical ideas there. But the point is, he's really got to go back. And now again, I could repeat, but I was thinking, well, what's his only idea here? Maybe his only idea is rook b2. Now, what of my pieces are not doing anything? Because when you don't have any urgency to do something, I don't have any urgency because he's not doing anything. If you realize your opponent's not doing anything, you can just take your time. When your opponent has a dangerous plan, you need to be urgent. You can't play little maneuvers like I'm doing here. So, but when you have time, look at your pieces that aren't doing anything. My queen and my rook. I need to get these guys into the game. Now I came up with a good plan. Queen c1. Why here? It stops his rook coming in, and my queen has ideas of coming to f4, increasing the pressure on the knight. My opponent went passive, bishop c8. And now I thought, well, there's no need to rush. Maybe he's going to go g5. Maybe at some point, if he breaks the pin, his knight can come into e4. So I'm just thinking about my opponent's ideas. I thought, let's stop it. f3. Let's stop his knight ever coming in. Queen d6. Okay, so my opponent, if I hadn't gone f3, maybe he could play knight e4 next because he's broken the pin. I wanted to improve my pieces. My bishop has done its job, so I brought it back to a diagonal, looking at his king. Bishop b7, and now I thought, well, okay, I have complete control. At some point in a game of chess, you have to turn the volume up. You have to turn the key. Even if you have complete control, against such a strong player, you can't just sit there. You have to do something. So how can I increase my initiative? Where should I be aiming? Well, I should be aiming where I've got the most pressure. That's on the king's side. My queen is looking there. My bishops are both pointing there. My rook might come over there. And a key thing you should do in games of chess, if you have time, is look at pawn breaks that help your position. Now, what potential pawn break may I have here? Think for yourself here. What pawn breaks can you think what have I got here? Do I have any pawn breaks later on against his king, maybe? What should I be doing? Well, I notice he has a pawn on h6. And when someone's moved a pawn in front of their king, it's a target. So how can I use a pawn break to hit that? g4. I have control of the position, so this plan, maybe of going g5, works very well. My opponent is still helpless. Rook to a8. Now I could go g5, but again, this would have been impatient. This is a weakness of mine. I thought, hang on a minute. The threat is stronger than the execution. I don't need to rush this. An old Simon may have rushed this, but a new Simon would try to get his last piece into the game, the rook. So queen to e3. My queen now centralizes. I may be threatening to take the knight and go rook e8, but mainly I want to get my last piece in. I don't need to play g5 because my opponent is doing nothing. Bishop c6, stopping my rook coming in, but now I use my last piece, rook e1. Rook b2, so I needed to have a defense for this. Well, I do. Rook to e2. If he ever takes on a3, I'm just going to open his king up with bishop takes f6. For example, queen takes a3, bishop takes f6, and now queen takes h6 here. And there's a checkmate pattern, which is quite common. Pawn takes rook, and again, this goes back to knowing your patterns, something we'll talk about later. Bishop to h7 check, only one move. Bishop g6 check, only one move. Queen check, only one move. And then queen there checkmate. This is a pattern I know, knowing your patterns. Positional patterns, tactical patterns, they help your play. So after rook e2, the game ended rook b8. And now I just move my pieces in slowly. And here again, I proved who the boss was, queen e3, repeating. And my opponent now hanged himself. He was sick. Knight d7. Bishop e7. Here, my rook is attacked. My rook comes in for the kill. And only now that I've built up every single powerful piece in the right position, is it time to look for the crescendo? Is it time to look for the finish? Because all of my pieces are working perfectly. Of course, if you see a tactical way to break through, you should use it, but you have to be very careful when you change the theme of the game. Now, maybe a better way to do this, a safe way, would have been g5, taking no risks. But I played rook takes h6 because this time I calculated well. And the point is, if he takes, well, after queen takes, there really is no way to stop the similar checkmate we saw before of my queen coming in somehow and delivering this horrible mate. So I can play this. I've won a pawn. He tries to defend, but my queen came in. And after f6, again, calculation was key. But I'd worked out I can go rook takes, and then rook takes here. I'm not spending too long because it's not important. The important thing is how I was thinking, how I adapted from my past. My opponent resigned here. He's in a helpless situation. He's 2 pawns down, and I'm got the attack with all my pieces doing very well. So really, all I did there was understanding my weaknesses, looking at what he did wrong, understanding my opponent's ideas. So what are the key things to take away before we move on to the next chapter? Well, the key things I want you to remember here is pick openings where you know the patterns. Try to memorize patterns and ideas by asking yourself why. Why am I moving that piece there? Where's it going? What am I trying to achieve? Why am I doing that? Why is my opponent trying to do that? Is my opponent trying to do something? If he is, do I need to stop it? Don't I? Now, I have to say, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I think it's very important to get these ideas across. So, patterns. Pick openings which you like the patterns in. Number 2, try to realize your own errors and work on your errors, eliminate them, and concentrate on your strengths. And another key thing, adapt to your opponent. Adapt. If you know your opponent, you can use that as we saw in the first game. If not, then you can, just look at your opponent's ideas. Try to stop them. This is very, very important. I mean, if you like tactics, pick tactical openings. If you like positional chess, pick positional openings. We'll look at this more in a minute. Another thing I would say, this is very key. I think the best way to learn is pick 3 openings. Pick one opening you play as white, one opening against e4, one opening against d4. Because then you'll be able to concentrate on really learning the middle game ideas more, and even the end game ideas. If you play lots of different openings, you're not going to know the patterns as well. You won't have time to. We're trying to do this as easily as we can. Pick one opening, because then you'll know the ideas, the middle game plans. Really get to master one trade rather than being an amateur in lots of trades. This is key. And also you've got to think how you improve. Okay, this course will hopefully help you improve, but if videos help you improve, watch videos. Don't read books. You don't need to. You don't need to read books. These are quick, like kind of tricks that will help you improve. And have strong foundations. Quick tricks will help you, but you need to build them on good foundations. Okay, well, I think that's enough for this chapter. I hope you enjoyed this one. It gives you a little taste of what's to come. We're going to build on this. We're going to make this whole story and hopefully improve you as a player. I'm not there to really know where your weaknesses are. You've got to do a bit of work yourself. I'm going to do my best. Thank you for, watching this first chapter.